So I'm going to be seam sealing a couple of tents today. I've got the OEX Bandicoot 2 Ultralite as well as the Bobcat 1 Ultralite. So both of these tents are made with an ultralight sil nylon material. Sil nylon's a more premium fabric than some of the polyester tents, but sometimes it can require seam sealing along all of the stitching areas. So why do tents need seam sealing, I hear you ask? And why don't the manufacturers do it themselves? So for starters, both of these tents are made with nylon which has been coated with silicone on both sides. So that makes the material very waterproof as well as very strong and tear resistant. So the majority of budget tents are made with polyester, and the coating on the inside is PU or polyurethane, urethane, I'm not sure how it's pronounced to be honest. But you are able on those tents to put tape behind the seams, so every tent needs stitching somewhere, and on the cheaper tents they can put like a waterproof tape along there, but with the silicone the tape won't stick, so you do have to use something called seam sealant. Although a lot of these tents will be very waterproof out of the box, every one of these little stitches has got a fine hole in there, and eventually under a lot of extreme weather water can penetrate through those stitch holes. So what I'm going to do is apply a thin layer of seam sealant across all of those stitching seams, and that will fully waterproof the tent. So why don't the manufacturers put that seam sealant on themselves? In order to seam seal a tent, you've got to pitch it up fully. You've got to manually, paint the seam sealant all the way along the stitches, although you won't need it on this bit. I'll explain why in a minute. And then you've got to leave it pitched up between 8 and 24 hours for the seam sealant to fully dry. So for a manufacturer to do that on a mass scale, when they're producing thousands and thousands of tents, it's just not cost effective. They wouldn't be able to manufacture these tents for a price that everyday people can afford. They'd also need massive warehouses just to pitch hundreds, thousands of tents. And with all that extra manpower and storage area, these tents would be double in price. So what most manufacturers do, including OEX, is they supply you with some seam sealant, little brush, and some instructions on how to do it yourself. So I'm going to go through with you what my process is for seam sealing tents. It's not very difficult to do. It does take a little bit of space, somewhere to pitch your tent up, and you've got to be able to leave it in dry conditions. So this is the first sunny consecutive couple of days that we've got coming up. So I'll get the seam sealant on, show you how it's all done, and then hopefully you'll feel much more confident in doing it yourself. So first thing that you need to know is that there are different types of seam sealer. So OEX have supplied these, so they are compatible with the coatings on this tent. So if you've got a silicone coated tent, you do need a silicone seam sealer. So there are other types out there, so just make sure you've got the right one for your tent. Obviously you need to pitch your tents up, so I've got both pitched out fully with guy lines on as well, so that puts the tent under the conditions that it's likely to be in when in use. So the fabric is stretched out a little bit. I do like the look of this tent, by the way. It's gorgeous, isn't it? Very sturdy as well for an ultralight tent. I say ultralight, it's a little bit heavier, this one. I'm not sure what it is, 1.4 kilos, something like that. I will pop it on the screen. So once you're pitched up, you want to have a look around at the areas that are going to need some seam sealant on them. It's the actual seams that are exposed to the inside of your tent that matter. So things like, I would do this seam here along the door, I would do all of the seams around here, I'd do around these tie-out points on both sides. Again on the back, the seams here, one that goes across, and on these tie-out points as well. It's not necessary to do the stitches along the bottom edge, because the water's just going to drop directly onto the grass there. So the first thing that I do is prepare the seams to take the seam sealant. So I give all of the seam areas a little bit of a wipe with some alcohol of some description. So something like rubbing alcohol or surgical spirit. It cleans the area and evaporates really quickly. Don't use white spirit when you're wiping down the tent seams. White spirit is a little bit greasier and it tends to dry out a lot slower. but you will be needing some of that in a moment or two. So once you've wiped clean all of the seams, just leave that a few minutes to dry. So it's now time to dig out your seam sealant. Now you can actually put this directly onto the seams, but it's a little bit thick in consistency, and sometimes it can be look a little bit messy once you've got it, if you use it directly from the tube anyway. So what I tend to do is get some of the sealant. It needs piercing on the top, so you just use the top of the lid, like a little point in there, push that on. Whoop, that breaks the seal. And then get yourself a little pot. So I nicked this off one of Joe's makeup things, but use the cap off a deodorant or something like that, and just put a good dollop of the seam sealant inside the pot. We'll need quite a bit, so probably half a tube's worth for now. You can see how thick and gloopy it is. Now you're going to need a little bit of white spirit to just thin this down a little bit. So put a little bit in and just mix it up. And you want the sort of consistency of maybe honey, you know, just the dripping honey that you get in a squeezable jar. Keep mixing. Probably better off with a stick than your brush. I have got spare brushes though. Still a bit thick, that. This is what you're looking for. So it's, you can see it's clearer already, and it's running off, look. But it's like running off quite thickly. Something like that. And then it's just a case of pasting it over the seams. Like this. Get it into all the stitches. Bit there that's a bit sticky, look. It's easy as that. If you've got some excess anywhere that you spill a drop or something, just wipe it off straight away while it's still wet. But when it's thinner like this, it looks much prettier once it's been applied. It's good to know how to use seam sealer anyway. I always take a little tube with me in my repair kit, because occasionally you do get leaks from zips and stuff like that, and you can just blob a little tiny bit of seam sealant on. Just over 5 minutes now, and I've done 1.5 of the loop. So I'm guessing this tent's going to take me 15 minutes in total. The more time you take, the neater the job will be. I personally would rather have a little bit more sealant on and it'd be waterproof, but I'll show you what to do if you do get the odd spot coming through, you know, the first time you get your tent out there. Because you might miss the odd stitch, so you might get the odd little drip that goes through. But it's a really easy fix, and it's, you know, the odd drip, you get more than a drip for condensation anyway, so yeah, I'm not worried. Right, last bit. I ain't got to go all the way up to the top because that shelf's covering it, so I'm just going to go from just underneath it. So when this dries, it will be clear, but you will see some sort of sheen or shine. It's like when you've got your silicone in your edges on your bathroom or around your window or something like that. Don't worry about it being absolutely perfect. It's a tent. Might be able to see it shine in there. That's where I've done up to. Yeah, probably about 15-20 minutes it's taken. Then it's just a case of leaving it to dry. If you pack it away while it's wet, all the silicone will stick to other parts of the tent. You don't want that. So that's why you need to use white spirits with this, because it dries evenly and a little bit slower. So if you use something like rubbing alcohol, then you'll get like a crust on the outside that dries first, and then it just takes longer for the whole thing to dry. White spirits works a lot better. Alright, you need to pay a little bit more of attention You know, when you've got ties and things like that and tie out points, that you get the sealant from all angles. There's quite a bit of stitching there, so get a little bit more of it on. I spilt a little drop of the silicone there. Just wipe that off with a little bit of bioethanol. Right, so that's the first one done. Took a little over 20 minutes. And see where I've a little bit shinier. Like I said, I don't need to do those bits. You can do if you want to go belts and braces, but it's only going to drip onto the fly sheet there. Going to need to mix up a little bit more of the silicone for this one. So let's say that you've gone out camping for the first time, it's raining and you've noticed that there's a little drip coming from a certain spot. So let's say you're getting the odd little droplet of water coming from one of the stitches here. Just take your seam sealant, which you've got in your little toolkit in your bag, blob a little tiny bit on your finger, and just put it over the area where you've got the little leak from. Obviously, if it's next morning and you're just about to go, I'd do that when you get home, but you know, if it's the evening before, just put a little blob on, it'll seal it up, and by the time you're ready to go the next day, it'll be dry. That looks about the perfect consistency. Not too runny, not too thick. It's like Goldilocks's porridge. Same again on this tent. Although I think this one's going to take a little bit longer. More seams on it, and it's a bit larger. So because I've thinned down the seam sealant a little bit, that allows it to penetrate into all of the holes. Just runs in all the little gaps. There we go, 2 tents seam sealed. So just a quick recap. So silk nylon is a better quality material than the polyester with a PU coating. So it's more durable, it will last longer. So PU coatings can suffer from something called hydrolysis, where the coating starts to break down after a while. So silk nylon lasts longer, but it does require a little bit more maintenance and work. Because you can't tape the seams, you might need to seam seal it. Potentially, it will be leak proof out of the factory, so you don't have to, but belts and braces, I always do. So it's pretty straightforward to do. Just prepare the area that you're going to seam seal with a little bit of rubbing alcohol or bioethanol, something like that. Then thin down your seam sealer with some white spirits, so it's like the consistency of runny honey. Then just brush it into the seams, where it could potentially drip water through to your inner area. And then leave your tents up till the next day. Obviously pick a day where you've got a little bit of sunshine. So the main reason that manufacturers let you seam seal the tent yourself is due to the cost element. The amount of additional cost to the tent, to pitch all of these out in a warehouse, seam seal them and then allow them to dry for 24 hours, it's just not practical for mass production tents. So let me know in the comments, would you rather have a go at seam sealing the tent yourself, which I've shown is pretty straightforward, or pay an extra £50 or whatever it is, to have the tent seam sealed in a factory? There are 1 or 2 independent manufacturers that will seam seal tents in-house for you, but they're charging around £50, something like that, to have that service done. But businesses like Go Outdoors, Blacks, Millets, selling tents on a mass scale, they just simply can't afford to do that. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are, and I hope you found this video helpful. Well, that's it for this one. I'll see you next time.